I think it's time to start. Let's start. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Paleopuc's weekly seminar. Today we have Jonathan Stine with us as a speaker, and he will be talking about Paleozoic Equatorial record of melting ice ages, calibrating the pace of Paleotropical environmental and ecological changes during the late Paleozoic Ice Age. And the format of today's talk is first there will be a welcome and announcement which I am doing right now. Then there will be a talk for 30 minutes followed by a moderated question and answer for 10 minutes. And please don't forget to send your question via chat to the question at Paleopux host. And speaker also agreed to stay for the tea time after the QA session. So tea time is nothing but it's a like a informal conversation with our speaker in a more relaxed setting. So if you are interested, you can stay for the tea time also. And little bit about the Paleopux housekeeping. So Paleopux values the participation of all the folks interested in the paleo sciences. Please remember to abide by our code of conduct during the today's seminar. Please mute yourself for the duration of the talk. And again, you can ask the question by chatting to the Paleopux host or by using the raise hand function. If you face any technical issue, please reach out to the Paleopux host. And we also have closed caption built into the Zoom. Please use the CC button to show or hide them. If you know any outstanding ECR, please nominate them. And the link to nominate will be provided into the chat box shortly. And we also get the weekly feedback for demographic information, which is completely anonymous. And link for feedback also will be dropped out into the chat shortly. As I mentioned, we have Jonathan Steen with us. So he has received his double bachelor from Mercyhurst University, Erie, Pennsylvania, USA, and PhD from University of Texas, Dallas, USA. And currently, he is a postdoctoral fellow at University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, USA. So with this, I invite Jonathan. So Jonathan, you now screen is yours, so you can start sharing your screen.
Okay. Thank you very much for the nice introduction, and thank you for having me here today. Started. Can everyone see the screen? Just want to confirm that.
Can we just
Perfect.
go? Yeah, yeah, perfect.
Okay. Well, hello. My name is Jonathan Stine, and today I'm going to talk to you guys about the Paleozoic Equatorial Record of Melting Ice Ages, or PERMIA, as we call it. It's a project I'm working on as my postdoc, and uh, looking forward to sharing with you guys today. So, just a quick background on myself. I was born and raised in Connecticut. Um, Grandson of Pennsylvania coal mines. Actually, ironically enough, they actually mined coal from the Carboniferous, which is the same age of the rocks that I'm studying now for my postdoc. So my parents like to make the joke of like, oh, my grandfather worked really hard to get my dad out of the mines, and here I am trying to go back into them. Uh, but always loved going out in the outdoors. Got my PhD, or sorry, got my bachelor's in geology, as was previously mentioned at Mercyhurst University. Got my PhD focusing on rock magnetism and paleomag from UT Dallas, and I'm currently a postdoc at the IRM, or Institute for Rock Magnetism, at the University of Minnesota. Although that's wrapping up soon, and from there I'll just be potentially moving on to next opportunities. We'll see. And as my research interests, as you can tell from the PhD, a lot of focus on rock magnetism for multiple purposes, ranging from geochronology with in terms of paleomagnetism, paleoclimatology, using magnetics as paleoclimatic proxies, um, and also kind of branching off a little bit environmental geology, although we won't really go into that today. And I also do a lot of core analysis, where I did IODP, did like the antepenultimate drilling site in the Mediterranean, and for this project, working on the Elk Ridge core, which I'll be presenting with you guys today. So this is all part of a larger project, NSF funded project called PERMIA, and it's not just me; it's ton of other scientists, undergraduates, graduates, postdocs, faculty, et cetera, have all worked on this. And I just want to give a brief shout out to all of them today, particularly the PIs of the grant, Adam Huttenlocker, Randy Ermis from the University of Utah, and then my advisor, Joshua Feinberg. And with that, let's get into it. So I'm sure that most of you guys are aware that the Earth kind of goes through cycles of hot houses and ice house phases. There is the kind of the modern Cenozoic Ice Age where we have the last glacial maximum and even that ice age that continues on today since we still have ice sheets, at least for now, on Greenland and Antarctica. And I'm also sure that you guys are aware of like really ancient ice house phases like snowball Earth, which occurred about 650 million years ago. However, one of the ice ages that doesn't get a lot of attention but really should is the late Paleozoic Ice Age, which occurred around 330 to, depending on who you ask, somewhere around 300 or 240 million years ago. And the reason why it's really important, especially from like kind of studying it potentially as like a analogy for future climate change, is that other than the modern Cenozoic Ice Age, it really is the only other ice age we have in the geologic record that occurred while we had a notable amount of flora and fauna on land. And as you know, even though I'm not a paleontologist, we like work with them and like showing off the various paleo art. Maybe not the most realistic, but kind of showing off, the various types of late Paleozoic fauna and flora and existing them with ice ages here. Um, Now, around the time, the around the Carboniferous Permian transition, around 300 million years ago, the late Paleozoic Ice Age started to kind of begin its decline. And this is notable, one, through various glacial records, especially looking at like Karoo in Australia. But we also see it throughout other kind of non-glacial rock records. I mean, here, most notably, this is actually from Utah, but it's the closest I can find. If you're looking at places like Pennsylvania or Germany, you notice like a coal gap. The coal in the Carboniferous just kind of stops and gives way to either like fluvial sandstone or just non-coal rocks. And then in other areas, we have a transition from like more finer scale fluvial siltstones to kind of more massive or like interbedded sandstones, kind of representing a aridification. But we also see a change in the paleontological record, where we have this kind of shift from what was previously a kind of cosmopolitan-esque, like even mix of semi-aquatic and aquatic and terrestrial animals, to one, at least in the Carboniferous, to one starting in the Permian that seems to be kind of exclusively dominated by terrestrial animals. Um, and this has been correlated to various potential paleontological events, such as potentially the Carboniferous rainforest collapse. And there's also been some like kind of quantitative analysis done on it. This from a Pardo et al. Nature paper, where all the sites in red represent sites that are kind of more dominated by terrestrial animals, and then more in blue kind of be more, aquatic, semi-aquatic. And once again, you can kind of see like somewhat of an even mix, especially at the paleo equator of the kind of two communities. And then when we get to the Permian, it seems to be kind of more dominated by these terrestrial animals. And one of the places we can probably see this the best is in the Cutler group, which are these red bed sedimentary rocks in Utah, the southwestern United States, especially. And even if you've never heard of the Cutler group, I guarantee you've probably seen it before. It's probably one of the more, especially here in Monument Valley, within in the Navajo Nation within Arizona. Monument Valley which is completely made up of the Cutler group, has been the site of multiple films, including Forrest Gump, a lot of cowboy movies, a lot of them with John Wayne. Back to the Future Part 3 was set in it. So if you never heard of it, I guarantee you guys have probably seen it before at least. Now, to kind of go into the color group a little bit in more detail, it consists of this siliciclastic wedge of kind of interfingering marine, fluvial, kind of aeolian siltstones and sandstones that were deposited around 300 million years ago around the paleo equator. And the beds we'll be focusing most on today will be the lower Cutler beds going on into the Cedar Mesa sandstone. Now, The Cutler group has been studied for a very long time because of its abundant fossil record. I believe at least since the early 1900s, it's been studied, and it consists of multiple species have been found, including Dilophosaurus, Xenacanthus, the freshwater sarks, Diadectidae, Dimetrodons, Sphenocodon, Areops, Diplocaulus, really cool amphibians. And it what's really cool about it also is that within the color group you see the same trend that I mentioned before, both lithologically, this kind of transition from a more kind of fluvial, more marine, marginal marine siltstone to one that's kind of like an Aeolian sandstone. And just within the stratigraphic column, you see this transition from this kind of even mix of aquatic, semi-aquatic fauna to one that is dominated in higher up sections by almost exclusively terrestrial animals. Now, one of the issues with kind of like correlating this with kind of like the large geologic record is that geochronologically, it's been very difficult to do that. For the as far as we can tell, it lacks ash layers for the most parts deposited during a long normal event, or sorry, a long reversal event paleomagnetically. There was some effort throughout the decades to try to use the kind of larger uh, faunal records to kind of establish a faunachron that way in order to kind of establish age. And from that, the kind of larger conclusion that was made for a very long time was that the lowermost section of the Cutler bed, which consists of the lower Cutler beds, the Halgaito formation, was assumed to be primarily Permian in age, um, and with a kind of Carboniferous Permian transition happening either near the base of the lower Cutler or like below it within the lower formation known as the Honaker Trail. However, this view kind of started to change with our co-author Adam Huttenlocker, who was looking at various faunal species, and he suggested that perhaps the Carbonous Permian transition might have happened higher up in section. So that was one of our goals, trying to figure out, okay, can we establish a better age through kind of a more detailed analysis of the Cutler group. But the problem with that is that, as you can see from these pictures, a lot of the exposures of the Cutler group cliffs out very easily. So to do a lot of geochronological analysis that we wanted to do, such as just plain old like Conodon and Fusolinid, um, data testing would be very difficult. However, luckily, we kind of did some research through the historical records, and we found that there actually was coring done within the Cutler group. Now, this is a little map I made yesterday, kind of showing off, and this isn't even an exhaustive list, but this is a map of kind of all the boreholes um, in the continental United States, anyway, the lower 48, that are currently held at the larger core laboratories, the USGS-1 and the Bureau of Economic Geology in Texas. And we were lucky to find that there was one that kind of struck right through the Cutler group, and this was known as the Elk Ridge Core. It was drilled in 1981, actually within the modern boundaries of the Bears Ears National Monument. For those of you who might be familiar with it, that was the monument on the news back when in the United States, President Obama expanded it, and then once Trump came in 2016, he shrunk it again, and then Biden expanded it when he came back into power. But luckily, the monument boundaries still stand. But anyway, the core was drilled in 1981, and the kind of main reason it was drilled, funnily enough, was that they were initially planning in the 80s to potentially put a nuclear storage facility within here. The idea being that there was a lot of salt, and maybe they can store all the nuclear waste within the salt. Um, they decided not to go with this and eventually moved on to Yucca Mountain, but then Yucca Mountain being shut down. Um, but the good thing about this coring is that we got like a nearly complete record of the Cutler group, at very least this kind of lower section that would go through the Carboniferous Permian boundary, which includes the Cedar Mesa sandstone and the lower Cutler beds. This captured around 450 meters. And as you can see, we can kind of have these beautiful cores right over here. And just to kind of give you guys a sense of scale, that 450 meters is actually taller than both the Empire State Building and the Eiffel Tower if we stacked up all the cores together. So what we did was that we cut, split, and polished all the core sections and actually took high resolution images of the cores. And one of the really cool things that happened by doing this polishing was that you can see, and this is just a regular high resolution photo image, but you can see already really nice images of fuselids and conodonts within kind of what would usually be considered terrestrial siltstone layers. Um, we also did a lot of geophysical scanning, including magnetic susceptibility, natural gamma radiation, bulk density by gamma ray attenuation or GRA density, which I'll go into a little bit more later. So kind of once with this polishing that was all completed, we were able to identify all these potential targets that we could then sample for micro biostratigraphy to kind of get a much more precise age of where the Carbonate Permian boundary was. Now, unfortunately, we couldn't really find a lot of fossil bearing layers in the Cedar Mesa sandstone, but we were able to get microfossil layers at the very top of the lower Cutler beds, and we actually found that using both conodonts and fusulinids, that the entire lower Cutler beds, which was previously interpreted as being like primarily Permian in age, only showed Carboniferous index fossils, suggesting that the Carboniferous Permian boundary, rather than being the lower Cutler beds, was much higher. Um, we also did some preliminary strontium isotope analysis, which isn't published yet, but from my co-authors kind of showed me preliminary data that also kind of showed beds that were more carboniferous in age for the lower Cutler rather than one that is Permian. We also did some preliminary magnetostratigraphy. This is the kind of this is very, very recent data, so it's still we're still kind of looking at it to kind of create a more precise analysis. But based off what we have so far, we've identified these kind of two magnetozones of normal polarity, which we're hoping that with kind of better sampling, we can potentially correlate to these two normal events right around the Carboniferous Permian boundary, known as the Cardomishian, and like in the upper normal event of the Kaiman, which, if that ends up being the case, would place the Carboniferous Permian boundary once again kind of right at the top of the Cedar Mesa, at least within the top like 20 meters of the Cedar Mesa. Um, the other analysis we did on the Elk Ridge core involved using cyclostratigraphy. Now, this kind of goes back to the geophysical data set that I did before. So I'm just going to move from what I see the people's faces here. So as you can see, when you look at the magnetic susceptibility, the gamma ray data attenuation, and the natural gamma radiation, you can see a pronounced cyclicity within the data set, within both the Cutler group as well as the underlying Honaker Trail formation. And the idea behind cyclostratigraphy, I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with the audience, within the audience are, but the idea is that using these cycles, assuming that they kind of correspond to paleoclimatic proxy, the idea is to try to correlate them to known astronomical cycles with known frequencies, including precession, which is around like a 19 to 20,000 year cycle, obliquity, which is around a 41,000 year cycle, and eccentricity, which varies between a 100,000 year cycle and like a 400,000 year cycle. Now, these vary throughout time, these kind of various frequencies, but the one that is the most stable is the eccentricity cycle, which is just the difference between the kind of Earth's orbit around the sun, whether it's more circular, in which case you'd kind of have more even seasons, or more elliptical, which would kind of give you a much more extreme summer and winter, which would create the different climate cycles that you would see recorded within the geophysical proxies. And kind of starting off with the Honaker Trail, we did what we call digital signal processing, where we look at the cycles that are present within at least with this one, the magnetic stability data set, and we use what's called evolutive harmonic spectral analysis, which uses kind of a Fourier analysis to pick out the cycles which are that occur the most often within the data set. So what this is showing here is that within this magnetic stability data set, it's kind of dominated by this 24-meter cycle and this 12-meter cycle, as well as this kind of 7-meter, 4.5, and this kind of weak 2-meter cycle here. And kind of based off the kind of current age constraints we have from the conodont fusulina data, because it has the conifer by far is the most abundant limestone layers with fossiliferous limestone layers, excuse me, that would kind of correspond at least the kind of 12-meter cycle to the 100,000 year eccentricity cycle. And kind of expanding this into the lower Cutler, we identified a 53-meter cycle, which is really strong, 16 and 13-meter cycle, an 8 to 7-meter cycle, 4.8 and a 2.9-meter cycle. And what was really cool about all these spatial cycles is that the ratios between them match the ratios that you would have if you just kind of divided 413 by 41 by 18, etc., implying that like these kind of hierarchical cycles we're seeing actually are the Milankovitch cycles we see here. And based off of that, we identified like a similar cycle, the 16, 13-meter cycle, which similar to kind of 12-meter cycle Honecker Trail, most likely corresponds to the short eccentricity cycle, this kind of 100,000 year cycle, while the 53-meter cycle would correspond to the long eccentricity 400,000 year cycle. And kind of using this like kind of back of the envelope map, this would kind of correspond to the lower Cutler being around 1 million years in duration, which agrees very strongly with the both kind of the biostratigraphy data and our preliminary paleomagnetic data. Now, the core analysis was mostly what I did as part of my postdoc, but my various co-authors, Randy Ermis, Adam Huttenlocher, they also, as well as Charles Henderson and Michael Reed, who did the fusulinid and conodont analysis, looked at various outcrop samples as well that we can try to correlate back to the Elk Ridge core. And starting off with the Valley of the Gods, looking at the, admittedly fewer but still present fossiliferous limestone layers, they went through the various microfossils in there, and they were only able to find carboniferous index fossils within the lower Cutler beds. Going up north towards Indian Creek, where at least you did have some kind of carbonate layers with microfossils within them, we were able to find, they were at least able to find the first Permian index fossil that was present within the Cedar Mesa, but not present within the lower Cutler, once again implying that the Carboniferous Permian boundary is within the Cedar Mesa and not within the lower Cutler. And then looking at this site in Hurrah Pass farther up north, once again, only were able to find Carboniferous or latest Pennsylvanian index fossils. So kind of correlating this all together, it kind of creates this picture, at least this kind of preliminary picture we have so far, that the lower Cutler beds are primarily Carboniferous in age, and the Carboniferous Permian boundary is much higher up within the Cedar Mesa sandstone. Now, what does that mean? That means that this kind of pace of aridification that I mentioned earlier, this kind of transition from these siltstone fluvial layers to these like aeolian sandstone layers, occurred over a relatively fast time period. Like I said, at most it was probably around 1 million years, which based off of current like plate tectonic estimates we have of the movement is much more indicative of like a climate change rather than just simply the plate tectonics, the Pangea just kind of slowly drifting up north, right? So this implies that this aridification event that we're seeing is actually related to the late Paleozoic Ice Age. And also, as I kept searching before, this also indicates that we need to do kind of a whole reanalysis of the large vertebrate faunal crons that were previously used to identify the Cutler group. Where previously, as I said before, the lower colored beds are previously defined as being primarily Permian. That should be moved up to where the Cedar Mesa is now the Permian, and the lower colored beds, which includes the Halgito and the Rico Formation, be primarily Carboniferous. And with this kind of updated chronology, this agrees with the von Olsen model. This kind of um, this change in kind of an even mix of marine, semi-aquatic, and terrestrial communities to one being primarily dominated by terrestrial communities as being one that's most likely related to the collapse of the late Paleozoic Ice Age, which likely resulted in greater aridification and thus an environment that was friendlier to terrestrial animals that didn't have to spend their entire life near water rather than ones like amphibians and freshwater fish that needed to spend their entire lives in water. So yeah, so just kind of to reconclude, to wrap everything up, I made 26 minutes. The age constraints agree pretty widely across multiple sites. The Carboniferous Permian transition is much higher in this section than previously thought, is within the lower Cedar Mesa sandstone rather than with the Halgito. We have these pervasive, most likely orbitally paced cycles throughout the entire section. This kind of previously defined phonochron known as Coyotean, which is previously assumed to be Permian, is most likely Carboniferous. And kind of bringing this all together, this implies that this kind of drying and kind of faunal turnover that we see within the Paleoequatorial regions is most likely correlated to these other sites and most likely correlated to a climate change event, most likely related to the beginning of the demise of late Paleozoic Ice Age rather than just a continental drift. Yeah, and that is what I got for you guys today. So just wanted to briefly acknowledge the funding we got from NSF, Bureau of Land Management, National Geographic, the permitting agencies, and all the various students and undergraduates and graduates who helped us out with fieldwork and core processing, and all the various research collaborators. And with that, I hope you guys enjoyed. And do you have any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan, for a great talk. It was really informative. Thank you so much. And just to remind the audience, please send your questions. If you have any doubt, any question, please send it to the chat box. And I think we already got few questions. I will put into the chat box, or I also will read. Okay. So the first question is, what does it indicate about the availability of the microfossils in the top section in Permian? Are those microfossils are entirely marine or terrestrials?
Oh, so the microfossils we saw were entirely
Yeah.
marine. They were conodonts and fusilids. I actually did, one second, I did have a photo of them, which I eventually cut. See.
What happens every time? Whatever you take out is exactly what somebody's going to ask to see.
Yeah. um, Here we go. Okay. Yeah. Um, so here we go. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, mostly so these are the conodont fossils, and there is the fusilids, which I don't have a great photo of like the thin section that the biostratigrapher looked at, but I do have this really nice image of a very large forams that you can see within the lower color beds. But yes, all of them were marine. I do believe. Now I'm not an expert in conodonts and fusilids, but if I understood what my co-authors told me correctly, the forams, the specific species of forams and conodonts were most likely indicative of a shallow marine environment rather than a deep marine one. But yeah, still marine.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think we have another question, which I will put to the chat box. Okay. Yes. As someone who collaborates with the paleobiologists, what do you wish they know?
What would I wish that they
Yeah,
know?
yeah,
Um,
they they know or they did differently in terms of presentation data, communicating findings, structuring research, etc.
um, not much. I mean, I don't I found that the paleontologists I worked with were very good at communicating the data. I found that we all worked very well together. I think probably if I was to criticize, it'd be on my end, and that would be not knowing all the taxonomy by heart. Like they would be able to list off like every single species like right off the bat, and I always need my little cue cards to help out with. But yeah, um, I mean, I guess kind of building off of what was so successful with me and kind of applying that to other or with sorry successful with our group and applying it to other projects is the paleontologists I did work with were very knowledgeable of like the methods I was working with. So there wasn't ever really friction with that. They understood at least on a basic level like how paleomagnetism worked and how cyclostratigraphy worked, etc. Um, so yeah, so I guess just when you're kind of working with your research group, make sure to have kind of at least a decent understanding of the methods they work with, which they certainly had, and I can certainly be better with, but yeah, hopefully
Thank you.
that answers the question.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for your
You're
answer.
welcome.
And I think we have another question from Julie Griffin. She is asking the number of different chronostratigraphic tools used is admirable, and I would love to hear about any possible conflict of the microfossil geochemistry and magnetostratigraphy.
They're TBD. uh, the only kind of conflicts that we encountered that is potentially problematic is that the Conodont Fusolinid data, um, although it seems to be, and once again, I'm not an expert in it, just how it was explained to me by my colleagues, is that they're really good at kind of identifying geochronologic boundaries in like a broad sense, even like relatively specifically, like oh, this is Gazellian, right? Um, versus, but when it comes to kind of ascribing like a numeric age to that, it can be a little difficult. So one thing that we initially try to do was to take all these conodonts and fusolinids and correlate them to like the North American cyclothems, and to see like, okay, can we use that to kind of give us maybe a little bit more numeric ages? Um, that proved to be it was a little ambiguous whether or not it agreed with the cyclostratigraphy and the paleomag. It definitely seems to agree really well, at least with heavily kind of marine layers like the Honaker Trail. But when we kind of get sparser data, it can be a little bit tougher. Um, that was kind of the only big quote unquote big conflict we had with the data. Um, Other things that I mean, I guess that I wish that we had would be ash layers that we can use for uranium lead dating to kind of give us, especially kind of in these sparser sections. Um, and I'm still holding out hope that like maybe if like I don't know, I can take the core and just scan it with a UV light, I can find like a bentonite layer that can help me. But yeah, until we can find that, yeah. I guess so I know I'm rambling a little bit. I apologize. I would like to have even more more geochronologic anchors, but like who doesn't, right? So
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you.
you're welcome.
And before going to next question, I think I would love to remind the audience, please send your question to the chat box if you have any doubt. And let's go for another question. So next question is, how common is it to be able to find such clear magnetic data in such old rocks? Is this a case of usually good preservation or clean record or just an underutilized techniques?
Really good question. So, that was originally actually a big debate in the practice of paleomagnetism for a long time was how far could we take it back? Because paleomagnetism, which is you dating rocks by correlating them to known geomagnetic reversals, only works if the Earth has had a consistent magnetic field throughout all of Earth history. And there has been some debate about like whether that has always been the case. The current consensus is that it most likely has always been the case, which would mean that paleomagnetism can, be used from like dating like Pleistocene sediments all the way down to like, Hadean, if we're ever lucky enough to find something like that. Um, so in terms of like that, in terms of that kind of ages it can work with, that's kind of the range you have, which is really good. But to kind of go more specific into what you were implying with your question of like the quality of the rocks, that can be like very important, right? So, kind of the rule of thumb with paleomag is usually igneous rocks are usually kind of your best bet because they, have like a lot of magnetite in them, strongly magnetic, and would be good recorders. Sedimentary rocks are kind of okay depending on which rocks you're working with. And I was lucky enough with the Cutler, especially dealing with the core because the core was very unweathered, that I had really, really good paleomagnetic data. Like they were very, they demag perfectly, seemed to have only one direction, which corresponded to the age that they were, or that we assumed they were based off other data. So I was very lucky in that regard. But I've also worked on sites where the paleomag was not so good. During my PhD, I was working on these Pleistocene sediments in Texas, and they were struck by lightning at some point in their history. And when that happens, and it's weird because they didn't look like fulgurite; they just looked like soil. But so you would never know, but when you put them in the magnetometer, they had a magnetization that was like so high that the only explanation was that like, and they were kind of so random that lightning must have struck at least nearby, created a large short magnetic field to remagnetize them. So yeah, so sometimes it is the luck of the draw. Yeah,
Oh, thank you, Jonathan.
yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you so much for all detailed explanation for all the questions. Thank you so much.
Oh, of course.
And
Thank you
I
guys for having me.
request to
Yeah.
audience, if you have any question, please put it into the chat box. I think we don't have any more questions. Okay, yes. So I think we can wrap up the question answer session.
Okay. Would you like me to stop sharing?
Yeah. And next, a small announcement.
Okay.
Thank you everyone for joining us for today's seminar. Please fill out the weekly feedback form and the link will be provided in the chat box shortly. And our next seminar will be on 24th February at 16 UTC. So we will be hearing from Emma Elliott Smith, and she will be talking about reconstructing historical sea otter ecology with zoo archaeology and stable isotopes. So as I mentioned earlier, Jonathan has agreed to stay with us for the tea time. Tea time is like more information, more informal conversation about the talk in relaxed setting. So before going to the tea time, we will have a break just for 2 minutes and see you in 2 minutes.